Now I have the privilege to speak with Eric Fingerhut, President and CEO of Jewish Federations of North America. Welcome, Eric.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So we're going to be speaking about the subjects that are near and dear to the EAJC, which are topics related to the community in Eastern Europe, of course. And I wanted to speak specifically about what's going on now with the war and the efforts that have happened through the federations. The North American Jewish community has really rallied around the Jews of Ukraine and Russia as the war broke out. Tell me a little bit about the financial aid and specifically the federation's financial aid. How much money has been given over the past 10 so months, and where has it gone?
So there's a deep connection between Jewish communities in North America and, of course, world Jewry. I mean, one of the things that we've pride ourselves on is being the global Jewish 911, making sure that we're there to respond. And so a part of the response to your question is to make sure that you understand and your listeners understand that the commitments that we make to this work are made year in and year out to build and maintain the infrastructure of response and rescue. The way I like to describe it is we don't build a fire department when our house is on fire. We build the fire department to be ready to respond to a fire, and you maintain it, and you make sure the equipment is maintained and that the staff is trained and all that. So our annual support for the Jewish Agency for Israel and the Joint Distribution Committee, the Joint Jewish Agency for Israel for Rescue and Aliyah, and JDC for humanitarian support on the ground, which is totals over $100 million a year in core unrestricted support year in and year out from the collection of 146 Jewish federations, is what enabled both the Jewish Agency and JDC to be on the ground when the war broke out, ready to respond, to grab that first wave of refugees and bring people to safety. So we're enormously proud of having supported that infrastructure that was in place with the expertise to be able to respond. Then, of course, over the last 10 months, there have been additional costs, extra planes and extra trains and extra hotels and buses and security needs and food and all of the things, medicine, all the things that come with it. To that end, the collection of Jewish federations has raised now over $78 million since the war broke out in additional emergency funding above and beyond what we do as our core support for this emergency system every year. Probably 20 million or so of that has gone to the Jewish Agency for additional support for this wave of Aliyah, which from Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, other places is now the largest number of Olim since the peak of the Soviet Jewry movement. Another 20 million or so for additional humanitarian needs to JDC, and then lots of other wonderful organizations, Chabad and others, who've done so much in Israel Aid, Hatzalah, who've done so much important emergency response work. And I have to say that from a historic perspective, the idea that really every Jew in Eastern Europe that was been a victim of this war has had the Jewish world reach out to them and help them is something that we're enormously proud of and gratified by.
Now, I don't know how much you remember, but back in the late 80s and early 90s, of course, we had the previous Aliyah, the post-Soviet era, and the Jewish community rallied around then. Are you able to compare and contrast at all what happened then, what happened now? Do you think we're more organized as a Jewish community today, or just, business as usual?
Well, certainly the memories of that, of the Soviet Aliyah, are very important to our community. There's a sense of great historic, satisfaction and pride at that. Since I wasn't, and most of our leaders today were not the leaders then, there's a few still, but most of us feel very much a historic responsibility that, I sit in this chair today. It's my turn. It's our turn. And the bar was set very high for us by our predecessors on this issue. So yes, it's a motivator for sure. But of course, you also have to recognize the ways in which this is different, and that is that this really is a war crisis The Soviet Jewry movement, as you know, was a long political movement that led finally to the doors being opened and the wall coming down. This was something that came on suddenly, but has been a very, very high level of need, and that's why I think the reason why I wanted to emphasize to you in my previous answer the issue of the ongoing core infrastructure is because, look, year in and year out, when we're working to keep that infrastructure of rescue and humanitarian relief, global 911 going, people say, oh, why do you need it? Why are we doing this again? And this is a reminder of why we do it year in and year out, and why it's critical to have that infrastructure in place.
For sure. Now, I understand that there were also some boots on the ground, that there were representatives from the federations and otherwise that actually went to the area to help. Can you tell me a little bit about those efforts and what that looked like?
Sure. Well, two things. One was we brought a lot of people, a lot of our leadership from across dozens and dozens of communities to the border to see the work going on. Because look, let's face it, the funds we raise, and the support we provide are coming from tens of thousands of donors across 146 federated communities plus dozens of other smaller communities. So to have people who personally witnessed it and were able to go back and describe it to their communities was really important. That's number one. Number two, and I think this is probably what you meant in what you were referring to in your question, is we saw a need for volunteer assistance. We were talking to our partners at the Jewish Agency, at JDC, and others, and they described how their staff was just overwhelmed and, of course, becoming exhausted. And we asked, "Do you need help?" And the answer was yes. But they were very careful. They said, "Look, and if we think about this, we all know that just people coming in to volunteer, unless it's really strategically planned and developed, can actually create more work for the people on the ground than less." And so we developed in partnership with the Jewish Agency and JDC we call a volunteer hub, and there were three main criteria for the first wave of volunteers. The first was we needed people who spoke the language because to be on the front lines and be helping refugees and such, if you don't speak the language, it wouldn't be good. It wouldn't be helpful. Secondly, you need people with some skills, social relevant skills, social work skills, or logistical skills, etc. And then third, they couldn't just come for a day and leave, because by the time they got acclimated, they wouldn't be effective. So they had to be able to stay a week or more. And so over the course of these last few months, we've mobilized over 100 professionals from within the Jewish community who speak Russian, Ukrainian, who have these kinds of skills, who we've helped go to the border and to the other places where refugees have been, and provide really important additional help. And we're looking to expand that. And of course, there will be some roles that don't require language, warehousing and other things that we can expand the number of people who can help. But we're very proud of this volunteer effort and hope that people out there who would like to help, we can match up to real need.
Interesting. And let's think a little bit also about the divide in terms of where the money was going with regards to helping the community on the ground, being able to stay and survive and thrive there, and how much was put toward Aliyah, which, if either, is the more important thrust. Do we want the Jewish community to move to Israel, where we know that they will be safer, or are we equally as invested in letting them make that choice to stay despite the challenges that might exist?
Yeah, so again, we have some historical experience. You mentioned the Soviet era, and of course that was an issue then. Do they go to Russia? Do they go to Israel? Do they go to other places? We have some historical experience with that, but there was an added level here, which is, as you know, most of the early refugees that came out of Ukraine were women and children whose husbands and fathers were staying back because of the draft laws and because of the sense of obligation to participate in the military effort, and so a lot of those people didn't want to go anywhere permanent. They wanted to stay in neighboring countries nearby in the hopes that they could soon be reunited with their families. Also, this immense sense of patriotism that has arisen in Ukraine rightfully so, of course, as a result of the resistance against what the world thought would have been a swift victory by Russian forces, and has of course turned out to be quite the opposite. Means that a lot of people want to stay in Ukraine, or they want to go back if they left temporarily to seek safety. So there's even more of a balance here. We want to make sure that everyone knows that Israel is an option for them. And of course, as we know, tens of thousands have gone to Israel, and we've made that possible through our work with the Jewish Agency and the government. But also, we know that many people want to stay for good and legitimate reasons, and that's why the humanitarian effort, on the ground has been so important. I do need to say two other quick things. One is, unfortunately, the humanitarian need is now getting worse, because Russia's clearly targeting the civilian infrastructure, energy, heat, et cetera, electricity, as the winter sets in, as a tactic of war, a weapon of war. They're targeting civilian infrastructure. So the humanitarian need is real, and we expect and are looking to do even more to be helpful there than has already, on top of what has already been done. And then the second, of course, is Russia. There's actually been more olim from Russia this year than Ukraine. It's discussed less for good reasons, but we have every reason to think that those numbers are going to continue to grow, and that the good and sufficient reasons why people are going to want to make Aliyah are going to continue to grow for at least for the coming year.
Amazing. Now, you actually mentioned something interesting about people not necessarily going to Israel. When we look back at the previous Aliyah and the previous exit of the Jews from the former Soviet Union, they didn't all go to Israel then either, even though there were, of course, so many, and there was an infusion of brain into the country that had a tremendous and positive impact on the state of Israel. But that also was true in America, where many Russian Jews or Jews from the former Soviet Union went as well. I'm wondering if you can just tell me a little bit about the impact that the post-Soviet community had on American Jewry as opposed to Israel.
Yeah, it's a great story, and actually, the story's still unfolding. Really, the young adults, people came over as children, are now, becoming, leading professionals, and are really fully integrating, into our communities, and so, we see a very strong, growing leadership cadre of lay leaders and professionals who came over as children as part of the Aliyah from the Soviet Union. For example, my new colleague, our new Federation executive in Dallas, is a young Russian-speaking immigrant, came with his family. Our senior vice president for public affairs for the entire Jewish Federation system, came from Ukraine after the fall of the Soviet Union when she was 6. So we're starting to see this level of, really top communal professionals who experience that. So it's a huge, enormous benefit to our community and to our society, but also they then are able to help us understand how better to integrate the Russian Jews into our community, and that's a priority for us at the Jewish Federations. And also, look, many have families. We live in such a mobile time, right? We can hop on planes and go to Israel, and we're connected instantly on social media, and so many have a family in Israel and family in North America. And move back and forth. Somebody comes here to go to college, goes there to serve in the army, goes back and forth, and come on shlichut, and it's really a dynamic, increasingly dynamic environment. And look, I think historians are going to study the Soviet Aliyah, both the impact on Israel and America for generations to come. I think this now generation of these professionals who came over as kids is a really fascinating topic. You should do a whole show just on that, because there's some great people to talk to.
Wonderful. Well, this was very interesting. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.